Welcome to the running backs for week 7 section of the RotoCurve videos for this week. Of course, Jim McCormick by my side, or maybe I'm by his side. One of us is definitely the sidekick. We don't know which. But before we get started, we do want to tell you about, of course, this trial we got going on for NFL that includes all the wonderful stuff you get in a package, projections, cheat sheets, all sorts of articles that you want, the optimized DFS lineups, which of course are both for DraftKings and FanDuel. You get all the tools that includes Red Zone and all the other wonderful stuff. So check it out. RotoCurve.com/NFL trial. This is the week 6 one. It's actually, let me get you the right graphic as long as I'm doing this, since I am a mess as per usual, as you've come to expect. Here we go. This is for week 7, and of course it's not week 6 anymore. RotoCurve.com/free-trial. The location has changed, but everything I just said is still included. Jim, let's go to you with running backs. We didn't talk about it much before the show, so I'm anxious to hear who you're on, because I think as interesting as it was at quarterback, it's equally as interesting at running back this week.
Yeah, I agree. There's some injuries they always hit the running back position, but it's opening up some value, some depth chart kind of surprises here as the week goes on. But there's also just the stable setup of stars still to rely on. Le'Veon Bell's a guy that as much as I love his total yardage, the price and the fact that game script, could favor him in terms of passing, but that Pittsburgh offense in general just seems kind of wary. I think in tournaments you can get into that, but for example, he's usually kind of your chalk guy. He's the Antonio Brown, fittingly, of running backs. But I'm going to go with LaShawn McCoy again. I continue to go with him. He's averaging over 20 touches a game. The red zone usage is there. The consistency is there. He's scoring. The thing is, too, is the way that they're running him off tackle and ever since Anthony Lynn has taken over, they're leading the league in rushing. They have even more rushing yards than the Cowboys. Also, obviously supported by Tyrod Taylor's rushing. But, the Dolphins are the 22nd ranked rush defense on Pro Football Focus. They've allowed 4.36 yards per carry. And most importantly, they're really bad at tackling. They've allowed 2.05 yards after first contact, which is, the 4th highest rate in the league. If you look at their linebacking core, it's really like Jelani Jenkins and Kiko Alonso, kind of like the aftermath of guys who really aren't very special. Those are really nice metrics to pursue. I just think there's a lot of security with McCoy, and as we saw last week, there's also a high ceiling. If I'm going to go cheap, which I am, at least with my second back in a lot of lineups this week, it's going to be either Spencer Ware, who's still at a discount because of the presence of Jamal Charles. On rosters, Charles is even more expensive, and they're comparably priced usually, on all markets really this week. Charles still has training wheels on. As much as, we want him to be the guy, or at least some people do, who drafted him in season long. The idea is that Ware's still the guy. He set a career high in rushes, rushing yards. He also had 11 rushes for 76 yards outside the tackles last week, which is more than he's had outside the tackles all season. So they're starting to get him into space. And I think that's a scheme that they realized during the bye week. It's something that Andy Reid talked about getting him outside of Eric Fisher on the right. So I think it's something that's important to note against, another team with awful linebackers. James Laurinaitis was dead last year in run stop percentage, which is the percentage of tackles made on run plays. So, they're just a really bad setup. Obviously, the Saints are easy to target, but everyone wants to load up against the Saints. I think, getting shares of the passing game are interesting, but the real way to do it, I think, is Spencer Ware. You don't have to pay a lot, and you're getting a workhorse.
Yeah, just a few notes, and I tweeted about it last week, is that I heard, I don't listen to radio much, but I was listening to Chicago Talk Radio, and they had a beat writer on who said that not confident in the what's the word he used? He's not confident in his knee yet. Let's put it that way, that he's still having issues with it. So, everyone was expected this extended workload quickly, and I don't know if it's going to happen soon or even at all, if he's worried that he can't trust his knee not buckling when he's running. So Spencer Ware's the guy, and I agree with you. We've all been trying for weeks to figure out the Alex Smith week, and it's very difficult because Andy Reid will not use Alex Smith if the running game is effective, basically. He'll go with his short passes to get a first down, but it'll mostly be Spencer Ware early and often against this New Orleans defense. You got to love it. Another piece of news from what you were talking about, LaShawn McCoy left practice with a hamstring injury today. We don't know if it's serious, but if he's out, I think Mike Gillislee is going to be chalky. If we don't see McCoy, and obviously he's going to be cheap. So those are some notes there. But the guy I want to start with is DeMarco Murray, who I think you're crazy if you don't pay for in cash games. I was talking to even Josh Kalachi earlier today, and he's telling me, it's a wide receiver week. And I'm going, that if you don't use DeMarco Murray in cash against Indianapolis, that's like playing basketball and not using James Harden against Sacramento in cash. I mean, it's you're given a gift here with Murray, who is has caught the third most passes of any backs so far this year, behind only Giovanni Bernard and Theo Riddick. So he's way involved in all of the offense, and this Colts team has allowed over 300 yards receiving and the most receiving touchdowns to opposing backs, along with they're way up there in terms of fantasy points allowed. So I think Murray's a guy that Tennessee's kind of like Kansas City in a way where they're not going to, force the pass game if the run's working. And Murray's obviously the main focus. So I think Murray is the guy to build around this week. I agree with you with Ware. That's the other guy I really like in cash. If you're spending down, it looks like Martin may or may not play. I think Jacquizz Rodgers is going to be the guy. We kind of talked about him. What did he have? 12 carries in the first quarter last week or whatever they played a few weeks ago. They were just pounding him.
It was historic usage. It was every play.
Yeah, exactly. Clearly, in Martin and Sims' absence, he's the guy. So if you're going to get that kind of workload against this San Francisco team that's given up 100 yards to everyone, I think you got to take it. And then I think if you're going, in between in terms of price tag, I know Ware's basically the same price, but I think Devontae Freeman's the other option you look to in cash against this bad San Diego rushing defense. I know they're kind of a two-headed monster, but I think Freeman's the guy to have this week. So those are my cash game options. Let's go to tournaments, Jim, because this is where, we find all these cheap guys. Let me know what your thoughts are for GPPs.
Well, one cheap guy that I actually don't mind is Theo Riddick. I know that he's this is only if he plays, obviously, but he's a reception monster, and a shootout could again ensue. We've talked about Detroit's allowance rates. It's another week for him to get healthy. I just like him in PPR leagues. But you actually mentioned Matt Jones and how like Washington could trend pass heavy, and I agree that they could trend pass heavy, but I actually think on the low this could be a Matt Jones game. The reason I say that is because the only reason Detroit's allowance rates, fantasy-wise, to running backs have been so low is because you don't have to run on them. You can pass with such ease. So, that is obviously a counter to Matt Jones's value. But my point is they've allowed 4.98 yards per carry. They've allowed the most yards before contact in the league to running backs. So you actually can run on Detroit. And I think if a team decides to open it up and run on them, I think this would be a situation where Jones will have low ownership. He's only 4,200 on DraftKings. There's a little bit of value in the receiving game, but really he needs a workhorse workload in order to meet value or exceed value. So I do agree that he's not ideal in the sense that he doesn't have a very high floor. But I do think Jones, we've seen it happen, can bust off long runs. And if he gets enough work, this Detroit defense has been susceptible to the run. They just haven't allowed a lot of fantasy points because, like we said, you don't have to run on them.
Right. I agree with you. Looking at tournaments, this is a week where you kind of got to pick one in terms of New England backs and in terms of Cincinnati backs, because I think both are in play, and it's just a question of which one's going to show up this week. If we look at recent trends, it looks like James White, but then you look at last week with Jay Ajayi, and to me it kind of projects as a LeGarrette Blount game. If New England gets up and then they just want to pound the ball. I know White's skill set is more conducive, but I just think that in games in which New England have been pretty heavily favored, Blount has had kind of his way when you look at the split numbers. So I think it's a week for him. But that being said, if Pitt proves to be competitive, I can see White as well. So I'm going to have shares of both. And then you kind of think about it in terms of Jeremy Hill Bernard. Hill's usage was at least back up last week. He had 13 carries. This does strike me as a game where Cincinnati's going to move up and down the field, and if they get to the goal line, I think Hill's going to get the carry. But that being said, it is a divisional game. It might be competitive. Bernard has been the guy, it looks like, recently, so I think he could get it done too. So those are two situations that, because I'm so torn, I'm not really going to pick a guy, go with him in cash or anything like that. They're just guys that I'm going to want some exposure to both. And, I'll go full disclosure. I think Blunt's the guy I'm going to use for New England, and I think Hill's the guy that I'm going to use for Cincinnati when it comes to both of them. I know their skill set isn't really conducive. So if we're looking for, the PPR type guy, I kind of like Duke Johnson if we think that Cincinnati, is going to dominate this game, which, if we're using Hill, we do think that they're going to be up. So Duke Johnson's a guy who scored his first career rushing touchdown last week. I think they're going to be behind. I mean, this guy's on pace for almost 1,000 yards from scrimmage, over 60 receptions. So quietly, he's putting together kind of a nice year. And if they get down, if they abandon the run with Isaiah Crowell, I think it could be a productive day. He's only 3,900 on DraftKings, so that is very interesting to me. Did we miss anyone at the running back position this week? Maybe we should talk about that Mike Davis, Sean Drawn situation.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting in the sense that last year we saw Drawn kind of have some really kind of sneaky PPR value, especially with how often they had to pass. That could be the case here. I know Davis seems like he's the guy based on last week's usage, situation. So it's intriguing. I think it's, again, one of those things where you have to pick your guy, right? So I think in the touchdown sense, which is how we've seen Carlos Hyde get his work done and out of that zone read, I'm actually going to pick Davis if I have to pick between the two, only because we're not really chasing floor here anyway, right? I mean, so why worry too much about who's the better PPR back? Like, I'd rather have the guy who could have 2 touchdowns. And I think the guy who could have 2 touchdowns, especially, you could just see this game being where, like, the Bucs completely dominate. And then, like, in the fourth quarter, Davis gets 2 cheap touchdowns or a cheap touchdown to cap off, a 15 to 18-point fantasy day really cheap. So I think Davis is the guy I'd pick. And not that we don't have to put a bet up for it, but of the New England backs, I'm still going to take White only because, in this Tom Brady offense, they were dominating in Cleveland, and he still had, 47% of the snaps, still dominated touches. Blunt is still going to get his goal line look. But I think Blunt's this guy. He's not that workhorse he was before. I think he's more touchdown or bust now. Whereas I think White is the guy who's going to be in there on important passing downs and be kind of the per route kind of efficiency guy. So it's just a point of difference. I mean, I think there's a valid argument for both. So really, we'll see, how that plays out.
Right. You're kind of the same as I am, where I'm taking a stand and I'm like, well, there's also a scenario where I can see the other guy getting it done, because that's the world we live in with Bill Belichick. And one guy that I think needs to be mentioned that we didn't, especially for tournaments, is kind of yesterday's thing in Melvin Gordon, because last week, he didn't score a touchdown against the Broncos. He played on Thursday night, so we all kind of forgot about him. But let's not forget, he touched the ball 27 times. He carried the ball 27 times and saw 2 targets. So I think against Atlanta, who is way up there in terms of, the fantasy points allowed, they've already allowed 5 rushing touchdowns. He's clearly the guy. 423 yards receiving to backs. It doesn't look like, McCluster's getting as involved as we thought. I think this could be a nice bounce back week for Melvin Gordon, who I think everyone's just considering to be not good with the way he's been running recently. But, he's still fantasy viable, assuming he can find the end zone and catch a few passes. And against this Falcons defense, everyone's been catching passes. They have allowed the most yards receiving, and they're way up there. I think they're second in terms of receptions allowed. So Melvin Gordon, pretty sneaky for tournaments, because I think he's going to be way under owned this week. Did we miss anyone at running back?
No, I think we got it. I think there's enough injury intrigue to carry the week out. So basically, the advice would be just to keep a track on, the Tampa situation. Keep a track on Shady McCoy's situation there. I mean, my thing with him is he finished the game and scored a touchdown at the end, but we'll see how it all plays out, because I think there's a lot of value being created here with these injuries.
Yeah, I agree with you. If if and when these guys are ruled out, I mean, especially Jacquizz Rodgers, that opens up. Now we can spend up at receiver. We'll get to that in the next segment. But that is all for us. Again, we've got this NFL trial going on. It is rotocurve.com/free hyphen trial. This is for week 7. Of course, it includes the position rankings, projections, cheat sheets, tools like DVP rankings, points per attempt, red zone. You get optimized lineups. You get access to ownership percentage. You get all the good things you want. So check that out. It is as free can be. Stay tuned as Jim and I will be talking wide receivers in the next segment.